Welcome to the Productivity Show, podcast where we believe that you can get everything done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. This is Tam Pham. I'm the founder and CEO of Agent Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Brooks Duncan. How are you today, Brooks?
I'm excellent, having a surprisingly good day. So, yeah, everything's great.
Today, we're going to be talking about our specialty topics, one of our favorite topics, and that is calendars. But specifically, we're going to be talking about how to clean up your calendar because it's one of the most important tools that we have in our arsenal. And it has an immediate impact when you know how to get it in tip top shape. So there aren't that many things that you can do to change that will have a drastic impact right away, but this is going to be one of them. So we're really excited for today's episode and content. So if you find that your calendar has become cluttered with like not real stuff on there, stuff that's out of date or irrelevant stuff, then we're going to walk you through some ways to fix that. And you might also find that some of the big projects or issues that has come up, and you find yourself in a situation where you go, oh my gosh, I don't have the time to do this stuff, and you need to clear space very quickly. I think you're going to find this episode very helpful as well. You can find links to everything that we share in the show notes by going to theproductivityshow.com/381. And as always, we like to kick things off with our top 3 favorite resources before we start into the content. So Brooks, what are they today?
All right. So the first resource is called the New Year Calendar, spelled NEU year, and we'll have a link like Tan said. And that's basically a giant wall calendar. You can have it landscape or horizontal that shows you the whole year in one view. And they have a paper version and a dry erase version. I buy it pretty much every year. I buy the dry erase version so I can change things around. And it's a great way to see a year at a glance and get your big rocks on there so you can see what's going on. So that's number one, the New Year calendar. Number two is Calendly, a tool that we use here at Agent Efficiency quite a bit. And basically, this is a web interface tool that lets people book appointments with you, and you can really fine-grain control your availability. So it really stops others from stealing time on your calendar when you don't want them to, and it can enforce things like gaps between meetings and that sort of thing. So we love Calendly here. We all use it, and that's tip number 2. And tip number 3 is for the paper people listening, and it's the 5-minute journal. So it's a simple daily planner that you can use on paper, and it really lets you get your day planned out in 5 minutes at a time. So those are our top 3 resources. Like Tan said, we'll have links, theproductivityshow.com/381. And as a teaser for our next episode, we're going to be talking about the 4-day work week. This is something we've been experimenting with a little bit here at Agent Efficiency. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we've worked on, how it went, how some of the things, the challenges we ran into. So if you're thinking of doing something similar like that, you're going to like that episode as well. All right, so Tan, we're talking about calendar cleanup, but why is that even important? Like, what's the benefit of it?
Well, the calendar kind of dictates and shows you what you have available in terms of time. And if you've been following us for a while, you know, one of the frameworks that we teach is called the T framework, right? It stands for time, energy, and attention. TEA. And if you're not familiar with this or you're brand new to us, you can find more information about this at theproductivityshow.com/T. We've done a bunch of episodes. We have tons of blog content on this. So if you're new to this, be sure to check out that resource. But the short version of it is that I like to think of productivity as 3 currencies. And if you can maximize those 3, time, energy, and attention, you are going to be an extremely productive person. And the reason we're talking about calendars today is that that particular thing, the calendar, is kind of like a tool that you can use to optimize and maximize your time. The way I like to think about it is kind of like, you know how you have a bank account and you log into your bank account to kind of see how much money you have, right? Well, it's the same thing with your calendar. You kind of use that particular tool to figure out how much time you have available to do the things you want to do, or to find out that you're actually running out of time and you need to do something about that as well. And so when you know how to use a calendar properly, you allow yourself to spend time in the best way possible, but also you allow yourself to be on time for appointments or for things you need to be at. But also it helps you plan both today and tomorrow and the week after and the following months so that you can be in the most efficient place possible. And so whether you use a digital calendar or a paper calendar, it doesn't matter. What tends to happen over time is that it gets cluttered up, right? So you have like stuff on there. Maybe you've color coded it. Maybe you use emojis like we've recommended in the past. And then over time, when you don't maintain it, it gets overly stuffed. There's a lot of stuff on there. Maybe you recognize it where you get to the point where you see a notification of something that's coming up and you go, yeah, no, that's actually a fake deadline. Like, I actually don't need to use this or follow this. So you're clicking on dismiss and you just move on, only to find out later that it bites you in your behind in some shape or form, right? So if you can't trust your calendar anymore, it becomes very difficult to be efficient with your time. And if you don't trust your calendar, what do you do then? Well, then you start to kind of go in firefight mode and where you just do things ad hoc and you're not really being proactive anymore. So one of the best things you can do is really get a grip on your calendar. And I want to use today's episode to kind of like get started on that path where we start to declutter some of the things that are on there and get it in tip-top shape.
All right, so we are going to be doing 3 ways to do a calendar cleanup. And so Tan, why don't you start us off with tip number 1, and that is to declutter your calendar. So we're going to be talking about the actual act of decluttering your calendar.
Yeah, so decluttering your calendar is really important. And what reminded me of this is I remember this was actually a few weeks ago. I woke up one day and I was like checking my phone. I opened up Fantastical, which is my calendar app on my iPhone. And when I looked at my calendar, I saw, oh my gosh, like it's not meeting day because meeting day is Wednesdays, right? It wasn't meeting day, but I had all these things on my calendar. And I went, oh my gosh, like this is not going to be a fun day whatsoever. But then as I was finishing up my morning routine and having my coffee and kind of thinking and planning my day, I was like, hey, actually half of these things on here are things I actually don't have to do. These are either imaginary deadlines or they were meetings that I was, asked to be on, but I didn't necessarily have to be on. And so I started my day with kind of like a negative mood or like, a negative outlook, even though I actually didn't have to be on all of these things because a lot of them were potentially optional for myself. And so just having that negative thought in the morning would be really easy to have my rest of the day completely derailed, right? I'm sure we've all been there where like you check your email in the morning and you go, oh my gosh, like this is going to be a terrible day. And then the rest of the morning you're in a bad mood and you're not as productive as you could be, right? Like how often has that happened to you and I? And it's the same thing happened to me when I was looking at my calendar. I saw so much stuff in there. And I go, oh my gosh, like I'm not feeling it. Like this is not going to be a very good day for me. Only to realize later on that actually, you know what, half of the stuff is irrelevant. And that's when I realized, you know what, I have to start decluttering this because if I'm having all this stuff on here and I made a commitment to myself to say, hey, if it's on my calendar, I'm going to do it, then I feel like I have to do everything that's on there, even though it turned out I didn't have to do everything on there. So that was a great reminder for me to say, hey, I need to start decluttering this stuff so that when I wake up and look at my calendar, I know that whatever is on there is visible, realistic, and something that I can do.
Yeah, and this can happen really, really easily. Is that over time, like you said, your calendar just becomes totally cluttered up. You've got these meetings maybe that you were invited to, but maybe you attended the first few, but then you never attend them anymore, or maybe you never had attended them in the first place. Maybe you subscribed to different calendars for like holidays or sports teams or events or something like that, and maybe they aren't really relevant to you. Maybe, I know a lot of us have been here, you created time blocks. So we talk a lot about, hey, you need to block off your time to do this and that. And maybe you enthusiastically created all these time blocks on your calendar, but you just always ignore them. Like the work that you're blocking off time for doesn't really happen. You just roll right through those time blocks. Or maybe, we talked about on the podcast before about how it's good to have like multiple calendars for different parts of your life and work, and you should color code them so that you have a view of what things are. So maybe you like color coded and created these different calendars, but you kind of went a little overboard, as we all do. And now your calendar has all these different calendars and color codes that you don't really use anymore. A good example that Kimberly is sharing in the live stream, or maybe you added some recurring recurring calendar things, and then and then they're just kind of like stuck there, right? You just see them all the time. It's not really recurring, but they're not real. These are the sorts of things that can happen very, very easily. So what do you do about that? How do you clean them up? Well, the first step is to, like Kimberly just said, delete those meetings that are real, is to delete those meetings that aren't real anymore or that you never go to. This is something that is very easy, like you said, to just click dismiss when these notifications pop up. But no, let's just get them off there once and for all. The 3 times rule, which we talked about on the podcast, let's put that into effect and just get rid of these calendar events that aren't real. So you can either go through your calendar and do it. Some calendar apps let you have like a list view, which might make it easier to see all the calendar events in one list. Might make it a little easier to select them and delete them. Another thing you want to do is maybe unsubscribe from calendars that aren't relevant anymore. This is something that happened to me recently. When I first started using calendars, I would like subscribe to calendars for my different sports teams. I subscribed to this Canadian holidays calendar, which I thought would be a good idea. But then what ended up happening is it would have all these all-day calendar events on my calendar, like, I don't know, King's Day in Prince Edward Island or something like that. I'm making that up. I don't know what their holidays are, but it would have all these holidays on my calendar that weren't even applicable to me. So it looked like you said earlier, it looked like my day would be like cluttered up with this stuff for stuff that wasn't even real. So I decided it would actually be better to just unsubscribe from a lot of these calendars and put the things that are actually relevant to me manually on my calendar, because sometimes some of these subscribed calendars will have events that seem like it should be relevant, but maybe you're not taking the day off or whatever. Another thing you can do is just trim down these things that aren't relevant anymore. So get rid of those extra calendars that you created that you don't really use. Like Kimberly said, get rid of those recurring events that aren't applicable to you. So these are some of the things that you want to apply that 3 times rule and just deal with them once and for all. Now, Tan, I have a question for you. One of the biggest questions we get at the Productivity Show and Asian Efficiency, people ask us all the time, this is relevant to our discussion, is time blocks. So what do you do if you have all of these time blocks on your calendar that you just ignore and just go whooshing by as you go through your day? Do you have any suggestions for what people can do about that?
Sure. So if you find yourself ignoring the time blocks that you have, then essentially what you're saying to yourself is, hey, I'm actually not going to be using this time to focus. I'm actually going to use this for something else. And that's actually a big waste of time when you think about it. So what I would recommend that you do is anytime you start looking at your calendar or you start planning, let's say a few days ahead or even a week, and you start to slot in those time blocks, know what you're going to be working on during that time. And if you don't know what that is, and you're just going to make it up on the spot, generally what I find that most people do then is, one, they ignore it. And so that time is essentially wasted or is not optimized in that sense. And so what I recommend you do is just like make sure that anytime you schedule a time block, have a specific intention to work on a specific thing. And if you don't have that, then leave it open. Don't have that time block there, because once you start conditioning yourself to dismiss a time block over and over again, guess what? Now that time block becomes just unoccupied time that could have been used for something way more important and efficient use. So again, the 3 times rule, if you find yourself ignoring something for 3 times or more, there's probably something you need to fix there.
Yeah, it comes down to you need to make a decision about these time blocks. Like you said, you either just like delete them, get them off your calendar if you're really not going to do it, or take the steps so that you can actually start keeping them. So like you said, have that attention, or maybe figure out a better time that you can move them to where it is possible. A lot of times these time blocks and anything else we want to do, it's just a matter of finding the right time.
All right. So that is tip number 1. That is to declutter your calendar. And before we move to tip number 2, I want to give a special shout out to our TPS Plus subscribers. So we have a upgraded version of the podcast called TPS Plus, and you can go to theproductivityshow.com/plus to check it out. But basically, it's where you get our episodes ad free. You get them a week early. You get bonus content where you get the T Framework audio course that we've talked about before. along with a bunch of other benefits. And if you become an annual member, you also get an exclusive t-shirt that's only for TPS Plus members that says one tweak a week. So that's been really popular. I want to thank everyone who's been a member so far. So thank you so much. And let's move on to tip number 2 here, and that is to triage your calendar. So what was this? Maybe a few months ago, I had a trip coming up to Paris, and it was about a week away. When I looked at my calendar, I needed to get this presentation deck done. So I was working on the keynote, and I had about 6-7 days left, and I was trying to figure out, like, how the hell am I going to get this presentation done? Because I have to do all these different things, like run errands, like make sure my passport is good, like all these other things before I left for Paris for a few weeks. And so when I looked at my calendar, I was like, oh my gosh, like there's just no way that I'm going to get this done every day. I had a dinner, I had a friend in town, I had errands to run, I had some volunteering events, I have birthdays, all in the span of like the next 6 days. And I started to question myself, like, what can I do to get this presentation done? Like, how the hell was I going to figure out a way to do this, right? And so maybe you've been in a situation before too, where you have an important deadline coming up. It's crunch time, and you go, I have no way of figuring out how to finish this, because you have obligations with your kids, your family, your significant other, and you start to figure out, okay, I'm actually in trouble right now. There's just no way I'm going to have the time to do this, which in one way is a good thing, knowing that you don't have the time for it, because now you can actually be proactive about it, right? The worst situation to be is, you know what, I'm just going to brute force it and say, I will figure out a way to get this done, despite all the things that are coming up. And if you find yourself in that kind of situation over and over and over again, it becomes really stressful. And I've known a lot of people over the years who always do this, and it's always a trap, because they always start complaining about their life and how they have no time for things, and they're always complaining about like work and stuff, when in fact it's really their own fault. If they just took the time to figure out what's important on their calendar, and then say, I'm going to prioritize this first, and maybe even eliminate some of the other things that aren't as important, you start to find that you can actually create a lot of time for the things that need to be done in a timely manner. And that's kind of like the idea of a triage, right? So this actually came from war times, where nurses would prioritize and sort victims to maximize the number of survivors. Because if nurses would just work on people linearly, meaning as they came in order, then they would be essentially very inefficient, because some people didn't need treatments immediately, and some people did. So what they tried to do is triage it by saying, okay, let's kind of like sort the victims that we have here in front of us and figure out who needs treatment right away and who doesn't. And let's make sure that those people who need treatment right away get first responder help. And for those people who are wounded but aren't necessarily going to die immediately, let's put them in another category and they get treatment later on. And this is all in the name of maximizing the number of survivors. And we essentially want to take that same idea and apply that to our calendar. Not everything that's on there is of equal importance. This applies both to your calendar and your to-do list as well. So this is always a sign that I always look for, is when you tell yourself, hey, I have to do all these things and everything looks equally important, then nothing truly is. And that's something that I always encourage people to think about. Nothing is equally important. You have to figure out a way to say what's more important than the other thing. Once you know what that is, let's figure out a way to prioritize it on our calendar before we do the other things.
I wonder how many people are old like me listening to this who know what triage is because we grew up watching MASH. Because you learn a lot about triage when you watch that show. So whenever I think of triage, I think of MASH. So there'll be I got people in the chat giving thumbs up. And so just like in a fictional Korean War show, you do a bunch of triage for helicopters coming in. You can do it for your calendar too, just like Tan said. And I'm going to give credit where credit's due for this particular section. And this actually is a good demonstration of the value of capture that we talk about on the productivity show a lot. When we were putting this episode together, I remembered this article that I read way back. I knew I had read it sometime, and it was a blog post by Michael Hyatt, which turns out I had captured to Evernote back in 2012. So I very quickly found it. And the article is called, "Is It Time for a Calendar Triage?" And so I'll have a link to that in the show notes. But it's a good example of a framework you can use to do this sort of calendar triage. So the 3 steps to this is, number 1, protect the basics. And this is just like Tan was saying. You want to make sure that you are identifying your priorities and protecting them. So look at your calendar, maybe, the next week, 2 weeks, whatever it is that you're trying to triage right now, and see like, okay, what are your priorities? Have you allocated time for them on your calendar? Have you made sure that you have time blocks, and these are real time blocks, not the time blocks that you're going to whoosh by. This is something that you need to get done now. So you're making it a priority. Do you have actually time for that on your calendar? Do you have this actual focus time that you can get it done? And is it realistic that you can do it given what is on your calendar? Because this is what happens all too often, is we say, oh, I'm going to do something this week. But if we actually look at our calendar, like Tan said, your calendar is like your bank account, your record of the time that you have available. If you look at your calendar and see that there's no chance you're actually going to get it done, then you know you have a problem. You've got to take some action. So that's number 1, protect the basics. Number 2 is to eliminate the non-essentials. So again, looking ahead at your calendar, are there any commitments on there that are getting in the way of your priorities or could potentially get in the way of your priorities? Is there anything on your calendar that you can maybe get rid of, cancel? Could you delegate it to someone else? Is there a way that this thing that's taking up time on your calendar, like a meeting or something like that, is it possible that it could be an email instead of a meeting? Or is it something that maybe something is scheduled for an hour or 2 hours, but maybe it could be just like a 15-minute stand-up just to get the gist of it and get started? So what are those non-essentials on your calendar that you can eliminate by canceling, delegating, or shifting it to some other medium? And then number 3, of course, you're not going to be able to eliminate everything, obviously. But number 3 is to reschedule some of what remains. So the things that you can't cancel, the things that you can't delete, the things that you can't delegate. Is there anything that maybe can't be canceled, but could at least be moved? You're doing triage for the immediate future, for your things that are really your priorities. So is there anything that maybe you could move to the week after or 2 weeks or something like that? So look at what can't be canceled but can be moved, and when can you move it to? Now, once you go through those 3, you're of course not going to be able to move everything. You're not going to be able to cancel everything. But hopefully, just by applying some of these techniques, you can make space for what's important now versus what was important at the time when it went on your calendar. Because a lot of times those aren't quite the same thing. I use this in similar situations. Unfortunately, I don't have any trips to Paris planned coming up. That would be nice. But that is a good example of times that I do apply this strategy, is when I have either some like big priority at AAE, for example, that we want to take action on now. There's a lot of times I need to like clear the decks for that. But also if I have a trip or vacation coming up, I want to make sure as soon as I know about it that I have space on my calendar to get that done, so that I'm not like dropping obligations, or even worse, maybe having to work when I'm supposed to be off. I want to do what I can to triage my calendar and make space for that beforehand.
One thing I find really helpful for me personally is every Sunday when I do my weekly planning, I kind of follow the steps that you mentioned, but I do them in slightly different order. So what I like to do is I like to look at my calendar and start eliminating stuff as much as possible. So it's actually part of my checklist to say, hey, what can I eliminate on my calendar to create more free and relaxation time? And it's one of my favorite things to do. And I'll go, okay, what do I have committed? Actually, I don't want to do this, or, this float tank sounds nice on this particular day, but I have a lot of stuff coming up, so that can wait. Or maybe it's a massage that I want to reschedule, or, maybe it's a dinner with someone that I might say, hey, this is a pretty close friend of mine. Like, I have more important things going on right now. Let's rearrange this. So I like to move stuff and eliminate stuff as much as possible, and then kind of clear the decks in a way. And then from there, I will then schedule my deep work time as needed. And so then I'll put it on my calendar, and I always have quote in an acronym that says DW, so deep work, colon, and then whatever task I want to work on. So I like to schedule like at least 3 hours a week on one particular thing, because I typically know if I can spend 3 hours on a particular task or a project, that's like major progress for me. And oftentimes that will spiral into more hours and more work anyway. But I know if I can get those 3 in and scheduled and actually follow through on them, I'm making really good progress. And so I want to encourage everyone that's listening, if you have some sort of weekly review or weekly planning, add this process in, like start eliminating stuff, reschedule stuff as needed, and see what you can then schedule. That is really important. Oh, all right. So that is tip number 2, to make sure that you triage your calendar. Okay. So let's move on to tip number 3 here. And that is to keep your calendar uncluttered going forward. And you might be wondering, how are you going to do this? Well, if you're like me, you might be a very messy person, and things, if you don't maintain them, or you're not someone who likes to maintain things like I do, then things become cluttered over time. So what can you do about this? Well, I actually was reminded of this a few weeks ago when my housekeeper, who comes here every 2 weeks, and she kind of cleans and organizes my place. Her name is Diana. Great lady, love her to death. And it's funny, when we talk to each other, my Spanish is kind of like half broken. So we have always very funny conversations when we talk to each other. But she comes here every 2 weeks, and she kind of like does everything for me. She puts everything back in place. She kind of organizes everything. And every time she moves stuff around, she tells me like, hey, Tian, I put this here or there. I put this brush here. I put this thing here. I just want to make sure you know. I'm like, okay, thank you so much. Right. Because we all know that challenge when someone moves stuff for you and you go, oh my gosh, I need this right now. And you don't know where it is because it's not in its usual place. Like, it's really confusing, right? But the point here is that my place is always a mess, because every 2 weeks when she comes, she always goes, Tan, this place is a mess. What are you doing? You need to keep it clean. But I'm happy you're doing it this way, because now I have more work to do. And I go, well, that's why you're here, because I'm so grateful that you're doing this. And what happens over time is that my countertops basically become a dumping ground. It's where everything goes: my mail, my keys, my hats, my sunglasses. Like, I know I have like specific places or homes for them, but I don't always put them there. So it becomes cluttered over time, where I have like Amazon cardboard boxes all over the place, and I almost start stumbling. And so this becomes like a natural thing that just happens every 2 weeks. She comes every 2 weeks, it's spot clean, it's completely organized, and by the end of the 2 weeks, it's completely cluttered again. And the way I finally fixed this was by literally just spending 5 minutes every single day at the end of the day, just tidying up my place. So every time she came and it was completely organized, I said to myself, okay, what can I do to keep it disorganized and this clean? And I said, okay, let's just clean this for 5 minutes every single day. So on day 1, after she left, I spent 5 minutes cleaning it up. And it was relatively easy. I actually had it done in less than 5 minutes. On day 2, I did the same thing. And then by the time she came 2 weeks later, there was very, very minimal clutter left, only because I spent 5 minutes or less every single day cleaning up a little bit. And you want to take that same idea to your calendar as well. If you don't maintain it on a regular basis, it just becomes cluttered over time. And this is probably why you're in this situation right now, where you find yourself like ignoring, notifications, and finding yourself that it's just overwhelming right now. So what can you do in terms of 1 or 2 minutes a day, or even 5 minutes or less, to maintain your calendar? Because it takes very little time to maintain, and it's going to be very effective moving forward.
That's a great example, and I'm glad you used the cleaning house example, because if, let's say, you hire a house cleaner and they come in and let's say they have a certain amount of time every week or whatever that they're there for, if they're spending time like putting away Amazon boxes and doing like general decluttering like that, that's time that they're not spending doing like real deep clean stuff, like the higher value stuff in a way. And it's kind of like the same with doing these calendar cleanups, which is that if you're spending your time like having to go through and delete a bunch of recurring meetings and unsubscribe from a bunch of calendars. That's time that you're not spending doing more high value activities. So if you can do the little stuff on a regular basis, then that leaves you more time for like the kind of real stuff. Because like you said, calendars are like offices. I actually have 2 desks in my office, and my regular desk is generally pretty good. I do clear to neutral on that. But when I first set up my second desk, I actually posted a picture of it on Facebook, and I said, okay, who thinks that this desk is going to become a dumping ground in my office? What's your vote? Yes or no? And everyone voted yes, and everybody is absolutely correct. And your calendar is the same. Like if you leave it alone, it's going to get cluttered. It's going to have all these stuff that we've been talking about on there. So like you said, a bit of time up front will really help you over time. So what you want to do is get into like a calendar routine. So maybe like you said, at the end of the day, or maybe like first thing in the morning or the end of the day before, just take a look at your calendar for the next day. Is there anything that needs to be removed? Is there anything that needs to be moved? Try to like just spend a tiny amount of time. And really, like you said, this is 5 minutes. It can be just seeing if there's anything the next day that needs to be dealt with. You can then roll that into like the start of the week, maybe Sunday night or Monday morning. Take a glance at your calendar. Does everything look real? The stuff that you want to do that week, does your calendar actually support it with the time that you have to actually do it? And if not, you got to figure out something there. You might need to either change your goals or change what's on your calendar, one of the two. And then you could even take that to the month level, right? At the end of the month or start of the month, take a high level look at your calendar. You don't need to go through like every entry, but do you have any like trips coming up? Do you have any vacations coming up? Is there like a customer conference that you're holding? Are there any like big rocks that can really throw a wrench into what's going on that month, and make sure that the stuff you want to do in that month actually supports it? So stuff's always going to come up, of course. You never know everything that's going to happen, even on a day basis. But if you keep on top of your calendar, that stuff that comes up is going to have much less of an impact than if your calendar is cluttered in the first place and then that stuff comes up. So yeah, the way I do it is I have a recurring task in OmniFocus. That's my task manager, every day to review my calendar, and then every week to go look ahead to the next week. And both of those are really, really helpful.
Yeah, we have a whole episode on doing a weekly review because I find that the weekly review, for me at least, kind of like puts that in place. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the check marks that I have as part of my weekly review, start eliminating stuff as much as possible. And sometimes that includes stuff that is recurring, that is not really relevant anymore, or it's maybe a volunteering event where I'm just unrealistically involved in, where I can't spend time doing this right now. So I can't be on the meetings all the time. So instead of having all my calendar saying, hey, yeah, it would be nice to attend this meeting, but if I'm being realistic about it and I know that I can't be on there, let's make sure we remove it then, right? And renegotiate that commitment right then and there. So I highly recommend you check out our weekly review episode. That is TPS 311. So 311. So if you go to theproductivityshow.com/311, you'll find it there as well. And we also have a really short course called Calendar Captain that helps you kind of declutter your calendar and set it up in the right way as well. So if you're unfamiliar with that course, go check that out at asianefficiency.com/products. You'll find Calendar Captain there as well, where is essentially a visual version of today's podcast episode with a lot more details and instructions and extra tips and strategies to walk you through how to set up your calendar, declutter it, make sure it's in tip-top shape, and has all the workflows you need to be extremely time efficient. So I find that the weekly review is really helpful. Spending maybe 1 or 2 minutes at the end of the day is really helpful as well. Kind of like how you do this for your home, but also for your calendar at the same time. And I want to also add that over time, Diana, my housekeeper, did compliment me how by doing this, my place became a little bit easier to manage for her and saved her a bunch of time. Again, like you said, Brooks, to your point, it allowed her to do the more deep cleaning stuff, the things that she needed to do right before she moved on to the next home. So those extra 2 minutes here and there really add up over time. And we've talked a lot about that, right? How small changes over time done consistently really add up. So be sure to do that as well. Again, tip number 3 here, keep your calendar uncluttered moving forward.
In the
All
live
right.
stream, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, in the live stream, Kimberly gives a really good tip, which is what she's trying to do is set her time blocking on a weekly basis, like intentionally set it every single week instead of just having a recurring item for the time block. Because she found when you have that recurring item, you tend to ignore it. But when you're actually setting it each week, more likely that you're actually going to keep it. So that's a great tip. All right, Tan. So we like to end all of these episodes with something actionable that somebody can do and take ahead. So, what is one thing that we want people to do as a result of this episode?
So yes, please write this down. And what I recommend you do next is look ahead to the next 2 weeks and do a quick declutter. So get rid of events, get rid of calendars you're not subscribed to anymore, and time blocks that you're ignoring and cluttering up your calendar. I think if you do that right now or in the next 10 minutes after finishing this episode, I think you're going to be in better shape than you were before this episode. Next week, we're going to be talking about the 4-day work week and what we've learned from doing this multiple times. So I'm really excited to share some of the insights that we have from this. And if you want to find links to everything that we talked about today, you can go to our show notes and find them in the app that you're listening to us from, or just go to theproductivityshow.com/381. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next Productive Monday.